Thank you very much. I've wanted to come up here for a long time. I first came up here when I was in the Coverdale leadership group several years ago with the GOP. I worked hard in the GOP for a number of years. Worked out when I got through clerking for a Supreme Court Justice, I worked in and around the General Assembly for about 10 or 12 years. And my boss was a Democrat in Roy Barnes' office, and so I couldn't be political during that period of time. But once my boss died, that relationship terminated, and I've been active in this pretty good while. I went to Carolyn's training session, I don't know, a few months ago, and I was told what to do. And I sat there and started checking off things that I was already doing. So Carolyn called me back and said, well, why didn't you come to the second session? And I said, I'm busy putting in practice what I saw in the first session. When I get through with that, I'll come back for the second session. And that's what I've done, is concentrate on getting the bums out of office. And I mean the bums, the sorriest ones. It hadn't been just refugee resettlement. It's been a long series of people who should not be in public office, who were cheating the system, who were using it for their own benefit, and serious self-dealing. And I'm talking about county commissioners, state representatives, state senators, the mayor of Brazelton, and I pretty much concentrated on Gwinnett County. You may have seen me on the news this morning on Channel 46. I spoke at the Snellville City Council meeting last night. I sent out and spent a lot of money on flyers and mailers exposing the mayor of Snellville, who had signed a false affidavit saying he didn't owe any tax money. Well, he had, I showed that he had 4 outstanding tax liens in DeKalb County. He had a federal FIFA and a tax lien against him, and I presume a state tax lien, as well as other problems. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, finally, the State Department of Revenue and the GBI and the county district attorney executed a search warrant against the city of Snellville's mayor's office and his business. So that's starting to come to fruition. Now that would have been, he ran as a group of 4, and that would mess up my winning record. And so if this comes out like I think it will, then my record will go back up, and I'll be back where I was. So it's not just about my winning record, it's about doing the right thing. I support this financially myself. I live like Ralph Nader lived. I don't know if you remember Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader didn't spend any money. He drove an old car, lived in a low-income place. I lived that way, I lived my life that way, and that's what I'm pretty much dedicated to. And Judge, I admire what you said. One thing I would suggest that you do is promise to give the jury the right to not just determine the facts, but also the law. Judges have gotten away from that. It's entirely constitutional and permissible for the judge to do that. And Carolyn, I'd like to see you jump on that campaign to have judges instruct as a jury instruction, mandatory if you support a judge, that he instruct the jury, that he tells the jury they have the right not only to determine the facts, but also the law. And that was put in our Constitution, or has been the law in Georgia for a long time. Judges have gotten away from that. And
Joe, you've been preaching that the last 3 meetings.
Yeah.
That we have that right to work.
That's terribly important. Now, my theme is refugee resettlement. I'm head of the state refugee resettlement effort, which is called Refugee Resettlement Relief. That sounds pretty important, but it's basically just me. It's been me. So it's not some big shot organization. I pay for the whole thing, and I've been working it for 4 years now. This refugee resettlement program is a federally financed program. And let me give you a little history about it. In 1980, Jimmy Carter signed the Refugee Resettlement Act, which allows the federal government to partner with nonprofit organizations, NGOs, and the idea is to bring in refugees from who have a good faith basis, proclaiming that they're being persecuted for race, religion, sexual orientation, and a few other liberal issues have been brought in there. It has degenerated into a Muslim relocation service. That's what this thing has fallen to over the years. Now, this has been supported for years and years by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce quietly. They don't come out and do it, say what they're doing, but here's why they're supporting it. Shortly after Carter signed this into law, there was a Federal Reserve Board chairman named Alan Greenspan. A lot of you may remember Alan Greenspan. He's the guy who failed to predict the last depression that we had. He was an academic airhead who lost sight of the most important part of the lending business, which is moral hazard. And moral hazard is what caused the last recession, or depression, as you will. I'm not going to go into that, but Greenspan addressed the problem this way. He said, starting back in the early 80s, that we were going to have a hole in our population when the baby boomers retired. And that hole was created by 50,000 men being killed in Vietnam, by abortion, women aborting their fetuses, and then women deciding that they were going to go in the workforce and they were having fewer babies. So he reasoned that the only way that we could close that gap or hole in the population, which he said would cause the GDP, gross domestic product at the time, to shrink 2 to 3% per year. Well, this scared the bejesus out of the Chamber of Commerce. It also scared the military, because if the GDP contracts, tax revenue would contract, and military spending would also contract, as well as the rest of the budget. So the entire federal bureaucracy got behind this program because none of these federal agencies wanted to lose any budget money, and the Chamber of Commerce sure didn't want to lose any money. So they started pumping money into churches, religious organizations. They came up with 9 major contractors. The 2 worst offenders in this part of the country was Catholic Charities, or rather the Catholic bishops, generically referred to as Catholic Charities. And believe me, their behavior has nothing to do with what the Catholic Church believes, or rather rank and file parishioner of the Catholic Church. And the International Rescue Committee, which is run, by the way, by David Bullock, the former foreign minister for Great Britain, who's paid over $500,000 a year to run that program. Now, these are a bunch of left-wingers. They're left-wing, open borders people who are not interested in just bringing people over here who've been persecuted overseas. These people are interested in bringing in people who will subscribe to their political agenda, which is left-wing Democrat politics. That's all this is. Chamber of Commerce is interested in it because the more people they bring in here, legally or illegally, means that they'll be able to fill up this hole in the market. And that's what Greenspan advocated, bringing in 10 million immigrants over the next 10 years. Well, they've gone way on past that.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I have been a pro-life activist for years, and I have observed that the direct number of immigrants that have been flooding into our country matches the number of abortions that have been performed on an annual basis.
Well, it's a whole lot more than that, Carolyn.
And you're telling me that it was a decision back in what year?
It was around 81, 82.
In the early 80s, there was a decision to bring in the immigrants in order to keep the population up because we weren't having enough of our own children. Well,
the men killed in Vietnam, abortions, and women electing to have fewer children. There's 3 of them together.
So a combination of 3 things. So we actually have, through abortion and refusing to have children, we have actually created our own problem?
Precisely. Along with the Vietnam War.
I just want to make that clear.
Right. Now, that's resulted in over a million immigrants a year come in this country legally. It's at least double that number come illegally. Whether they're walking across the border from Mexico or they're coming in on visas. The Chinese are great at using this loophole. Or slipping in through Canada, or coming in offshore from North Carolina and places like that, they're being used as drug mules to come in. Regardless of how they come in here, we're bringing twice that number in here illegally. Now this worked fine in Greenspan, and every president since then has endorsed this policy, even though they're telling you that they don't. They love the program because the Chamber of Commerce loves it, and the Chamber of Commerce donates a lot of money to both sides of the aisle in Congress and to the president and all the politicians all the way down the line. This program is infested with money. This is not about human charity. This is not about helping people. This is about money. This is all this is money. Okay? And my position is I am not against any particular group. Some people want to damn the Muslims. I don't have any grudge against the Muslims or the Syrians or any other group. But the fact of the matter is, over the last year, almost 100% of the people who've been brought here are Muslims. And they do not mix in our culture. That's a fact. You've seen that. They gather in enclaves, live by themselves, and do not assimilate, which is what the statute used to say. And now they lowered the standard to integrate. They don't integrate either. They stay in their own group. And they're developing a culture, subculture inside of America that is becoming terribly, terribly dangerous.
And how many children do they have per adult?
The average refugee family has 4 children per family. The average Muslim family has over 8. Now, the refugee advocates will tell you that the federal government pays for this program. Nothing could be further from the truth. The federal government pays for these people for the first 90 days. They pay the airfare over here. They pay these charities to take care of these people for 90 days. And the way the system works is the first day they arrive in Atlanta, which has been the big processing point at International Rescue Commission or Catholic Charities. They start filling out the paperwork for food stamps and all the rest of the program. Medicare programs, 16 different welfare programs. Now I left this sheet on your desk. I left one per table you can share because the printing on this is getting kind of expensive. Because I go from one group to another talking about this. On the third page, you'll see the list of those 16 different charities. You need to add to that list free college educations. Now, after 90 days, these people are dumped on the Georgia welfare system, and they stay there the rest of their lives. They don't want to be here at this country. They've been promised money to come here. They've been promised a lot of money. They've been told that come to America, the streets are paved with gold. A lot of them have become dissatisfied because that hadn't worked out in life. You may know some of them. A couple of them are the Sonar brothers of the Boston Marathon fame. When the welfare train ran out up there, they became very ugly about it. It caused a lot of problems in Boston, ruined a lot of people's lives. There's the fellow up here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He came as a child. Carolyn was talking about, somebody was talking about, it's unfair to not let women and children in here. Well, the San Bernardino bomber was a man and woman team. The guy in Chattanooga came here as a child. The refugee resettlement advocates tried to claim that he was not part of the refugee resettlement program. Yeah, he is. I drove up to Chattanooga and I verified that for the people in the community up there. He and his whole family came under the refugee resettlement program. He came as a child. He got a fine education, compliments the people of Tennessee. He went through the University of Tennessee system and got an engineering job. But he found out that the gravy train had run out as he became an adult, and he actually had to work for a living. He didn't like it, went back overseas. He mixed with one of the violent groups over there, and then he shot up that military induction center in Tennessee and killed a boy right here in your neighbor Cobb County. Okay? So when they tell you, oh, it's cruel to discriminate against women and children, it is nonsense. That is where, those are the most vulnerable people, women and children. The men who are indoctrinated in this program already know what they're going to do. They bring in the women and children, and they start pushing this thing across the internet, throughout the world, and it's here, it's going to explode, and I'm just waiting now for another event. They seem to circulate around. These things go in a cycle. After we had the bombing in San Bernardino, we had a bunch of bombings in Indonesia. Okay? Then it moved around to northern Africa and Central Africa. And then it moved up to Paris, France, and then over to Brussels. Okay? It's about time for it to make its way back around the globe, back to here, because we've become fat, dumb, and happy. We've let our guard down, and we're gonna have one of those events here in the not too distant future. Because not only do we have ISIS to contend with, Al-Qaeda is still alive and well, and you have a lot of these lone wolves, and you have these people coming under the refugee resettlement system. And there's no vetting in the refugee resettlement program. You've been told that there's vetting. There is none. None. Their vetting process works like this. They let you into a refugee camp overseas, and you stay there 18 months, 12 to 18 months. If you don't cause any trouble, you're vetted. That's the way it works. There is no way to vet somebody from a failed state. None. And the countries that have alerted us to this problem, we've ignored that information. For instance, Vladimir Putin had the KGB notify the American FBI that the Sonar brothers were trouble, serious trouble. We ignored it. You saw what happened. They just blew it off, but that's Putin, you know, he's a cruel dictator. That's what our American government is doing, is turning a blind eye to this. And you have to stop this. You have to stop this at the local level. Carolyn was talking about the problems with government are not at the national level. She's exactly right. The problems with government are at the local level. This out-of-control spending by the federal government is because these local governments, state and local governments, are continuing to grab the money. Continuing to grab and grab and grab more and more money. And that's what's happening in refugee resettlement. Our state government has agreed to take more money on federal programs and other places in exchange for bringing over 3,000 refugees in here a year. So what you're doing is they have sold your freedom because they want more money for their environmental program, or they want more money for their peach care program, or they want money for this or that. It's a trade-off. So they're selling your freedom, what it amounts to. How do I know that? Renee Unneman told me that 4 years ago. She wouldn't tell me what programs the money was going into, but she admitted they had sold you out.
Joe,
and that was the way the program was going to work.
Tell them who Renee Unneman is.
Renee Unneman is the left-wing state senator from Gwinnett County.
She has an R by her name, correct?
Yeah, she has an R, but she's a Democrat that swapped over a long time ago. She's a leftist. She's a liberal, and she's the only woman Republican woman in the state Senate. And Renee Unneman passed a medical package bill a few years ago with the help of Fran Miller and her Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate. And it allowed her employer, Amerigroup Insurance Company, to capture $3.5 billion worth of medical contracts. Now, one of those contracts, medical contracts, is the Peach Care program. And the Peach Care program pays the health care on refugee resettlement. So as far as Underwood is concerned, she doesn't particularly care about refugees, but the more refugees she brings here, the more money she makes from Amerigroup, because Amerigroup provides the Peach Care insurance for refugees. So it's a money-making process for her. Just like Fran Miller in the Senate, Fran Miller could have cleaned up this P-card scandal in DeKalb County years ago. But Fran Miller's bank is in the P-card business. They make money off P-card transactions. Paul was telling me about how Miller had tricked another contractor or agent out of some business and had managed to get in a similar program in Northside Hospital and was making tremendous commissions there. Anytime you hear about a P-card problem, you got to remember that there's several people in the legislature, Fran Miller in the Senate, who's worked for the bank all his years in the legislature, claims he doesn't work for a bank. Technically, he works for Wells Fargo Insurance, which is owned by the bank, you see. But he doesn't work for the bank, he says. He also has supported every piece of legislation that the bank has been interested in and wanted passed in the General Assembly. You see, he has a vested interest in this, and I don't care what he says. His two most important roles in the General Assembly are taking care of the banks and the insurance companies, and of course the refugees, because in his heart that's the way he feels. And his sidekick, Tom Taylor, is the same way. Now, I had marked several things on this refugee resettlement fact sheet, which is out of date now. So the data on here, the numbers you see on here have increased exponentially. One thing I want to extract from that is the Special Immigration Visa Program. Now, when you add in the regular refugees plus the SIVs, if you go over here in item number 16, the SIVs, or Special Immigration Visas, is a loophole in the refugee program that lets in people who can't get in here in this country by any other program, not the diversity visa program or any other visas. So the SIVs started out with Haitians and Cubans, and then it was expanded to the Iraqis and Afghans. You might have to looking on this. Now, the SIV program, and I gave Carolyn one of these packets, started out as a humanitarian program. And the idea under 212D3 of that statute was it's a catch-all provision to let anybody in here who couldn't get in here any other way, we let them in here so they could avail themselves of American hospital facilities, say they had a serious heart attack and they don't have any medical care like that in their country, or they had a funeral in the family, things like this. That's what Congress intended it for. But if you look on this thing that I gave you, Carol, and I gave you the master copy here, there's a website called the Immigration Daily where you see where the lawyers have expanded that exception to the point where it's no longer just people who come in here for an emergency situation that's justified by humanitarian purposes or other national interests. It has been expanded to where they can bring convicted felons in here. And in this chart that I've published, and I've given Carolyn this, We brought in 129,000 people under the SIV total number the year before last. Now, what those people are, there are some that are brought in here for humanitarian purposes, but the expansion of the program and the liberalization of this exception allows convicted felons to be brought in here. Okay? So if you've been a convicted felon and been paroled out of an American jail and you're an immigrant who doesn't have any reason for being here, no valid papers, you've been brought here illegally, you can apply under this program and be paroled in the United States. All you got to do is have somebody give you a job offer. And they write down in the job description that an American can't fill the job, or American's not available for the job, and they bring them right in. If they've been paroled out of a foreign jail, they can bring them in here. And this includes felons who've been convicted of moral turpitude, rape, robbery, murder, kidnapping, arson, all your theft crimes. None of those people are excluded under this program. The only ones that the statute prohibits are people who have worked against American interest. And what they're talking about is American military interest overseas. And people who have supported the Nazi program in World War II. Those are the only two groups that are excluded. Well, I think about all the Nazis are dead now, so that just leaves people who have been actively fighting against American troops overseas. Other than that, everybody else comes in. They could have supported Al-Qaeda. They could have given the enemy aid and comfort, both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That doesn't exclude these people. They can be on the American terrorist watch list and still come in. So that's what you're dealing with in this program.
I've got a question now.
This thing is insidious. It is awful.
Who liberalized these laws to bring in these wicked people?
Who what?
Who liberalized all these laws?
Well, that's Section 212D of the D3 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And the lawyers who pushed this have argued these cases in court and have had the Immigration Review Board, which has been stacked with pro-immigration people and liberals, have made ruling after ruling, and gradually they have broadened this thing out year after year after year to where there's only those two groups of people that are excluded: Nazis and people who have actually fought against our military. So that's what lawyers have done to essentially...
It had to be passed by the federal government.
No, it didn't. No passing. These are rulings from the Immigration Review Board.
Okay, this is regulatory.
Right. So that's what's happening to your refugee resettlement program. Now, I've got this sheet here. Some of you, that I think you have on your desk. This is target assistance formula allocations. And by the way, in Georgia, this amounts to 65 felons a year that are brought in here in Georgia on this program. That's what it means in raw numbers. Actually, it's more than that number now because this is old data. There is another program that's above and beyond the refugee resettlement program. Now, the way this works is if you've been out of work for between 1 and 5 years, and you can't find work and you're a refugee, the state of Georgia has taken money from the federal government, which will pay you extra money, extra welfare benefits, provided you live in Fulton and DeKalb counties. And you get this assistance so long as you agree to live in one of those two counties in Georgia. Now, the way this has worked out is this has pulled refugees in here from all over the country. How many refugees? The federal government just published the figures on this a few months ago. That's 20,000 of these people who've been brought in here in the last 4 years. That's in addition to the refugees. So you're getting about 2,500 refugees a year. You're getting another 500 asylees a year for that's people who come in here and manage to get on American soil and are granted asylum. That's 3,000 refugees and asylees a year. Plus, we have paid, your General Assembly has voted to spend this federal money to bring in here another 5,000 a year. That's 8,000 refugees total a year in Georgia over the last 4 years. They have managed to more than double the size of the program with these targeted assistance grants. That's what's happening. That's what your Georgia General Assembly is doing to you. Now, we could have negotiated down a lower number of refugees anytime the Georgia General Assembly had wanted to do it. And all they had to do is say, okay, keep some of your federal money. I understand that they wanted to do this during the recession. But like every other thing, every other item in the budget, once it gets in the budget, it stays in the budget. Because you've got a bunch of knuckleheads in the General Assembly who just sit there and look on the budget for anything that affects their little county, their little district. If it doesn't affect their little district, they don't care. They don't care. I had to go, and I had to point out to the House Appropriation Chairman the refugee resettlement budget. He didn't know. Underman knew because she was making money on it. But I had to point that out to the House Appropriations Chairman, who was appropriating the money. All spending bills, you know, constitutionally required to start in the House. They claim the governor sets the budget. The governor just publishes a suggested budget. The actual budget is formulated in the Georgia House of Representatives. Okay? So when your House of Representative member says, well, I don't know anything about that, they're just flat out lying to you. They formulate the budget. And then it goes from there. Go ahead.
I want to give time for people to ask questions.
All right.
And I want to ask you a question. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. So I want to ask you this question.
Yeah.
When the governor came out and said he was not going to allow the refugees to be resettled here in Georgia, how many of you remember seeing that in the news? Okay, good. What happened, what really happened there? Can you explain that to us?
Well, I've heard 6 governors since I've been following politics say that. I've heard the North Carolina governor say it twice, the South Carolina governor, the Mississippi, Alabama governor, the Georgia governor, the Florida governor have all come out and proclaimed, we're not going to do this or that or the other because we're not going to let the federal government tell us what to do. And then the federal government comes back and says, and every time it was talking about the food stamp program, which our governor was talking about. Every time the federal government comes back and writes them a letter or contacts them, tell them they're violating federal law, and if they cut off the food stamp program, they're going to cut off all the rest of the federal money in the state. Normally it's a road money or something really serious like that. And that's the way they get the states back in line. Every one of these governors who did this knew that the federal government would react immediately to cut their money off, and if they didn't comply then, to use the power of the Attorney General to make them comply, because your food stamp program and the rest of these welfare programs have civil rights provisions in them, okay? You're violating the welfare recipient's civil rights if you cut this money off. So it's a grandstand play. It's just nothing but a political play. And then, of course, everybody thinks, oh, our governor really tried hard to do this, tried to stop this, couldn't stop it. Well, when that happened, the Attorney General issued an opinion shortly thereafter. I have a copy of it right here, the full opinion. And in the opinion, way over in the opinion, toward the end, the Attorney General said, first he talked about the preemption clause, about how the federal government preempts the state and has all the power to do all these things. And he was applying this to the refugee resettlement program. And he said, of course, the state couldn't cut off the welfare money. But that as it applied to the refugee resettlement program, he said this is your Georgia Attorney General. If the state no longer wants to function as a federally designated refugee resettlement program contractor, it may cease to participate after giving 120 days advance notice to the Office of the Director of the Refugee Resettlement. In other words, we could get out of the refugee resettlement program, Carolyn, anytime we wanted to by giving 120 days notice. Okay, now what they'll do is appoint a federal administrator and the program will go right on. But I'm not advocating that we get out. I'm advocating that we do our jobs and say, we'll take X number of refugees and that's it. If you want to cut back on the federal money, cut it. We don't need it. You're selling our citizenship. Every day they bring in refugees, your citizenship gets a little cheaper, a little cheaper. And you know what I'm talking about, because you're fighting against what's happening here at the local level. You see,
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to take all this up, so if anybody else has questions, please interrupt. I want to ask you this. I want to know why we are taking in refugees into the United States from a foreign nation and power and culture that cannot assimilate into the American culture and is not doing so.
I'd like to know that myself.
So the reason is, should we be doing that? Fundamentally, I think we should not be doing it. I'm trying to think when we resettled Koreans, Vietnamese, yes.
I brought that question up to a lot of people, and they said these people from these Muslim countries are moderates. I want to ask these people in here, how many of you have read the Quran? Have any of you read it?
I have not the whole thing, but I've read parts of it.
Well, part of it,
Not moderate by any shape
No.
or form.
now part of this has been the money. Okay, we've done this to pacify Saudi Arabia because we wanted to keep the oil money coming here. And they pretty much had us over a barrel for a long time. They don't have us over a barrel anymore. Okay, we don't need Saudi Arabia's oil. There's plenty of other oil, and we found out now there's oil everywhere, all over the world. The only country that doesn't seem to have a surplus of oil is China, and eventually they'll find it in China. So there's no justification for this anymore. The Bush families just created a stampede of refugees coming here. They were going to appease the Saudis. And of course, you know, the Bush family was in the oil business, and they were making money with deals from the Saudis before they're elected, and now a great deal of money after they're elected. So it's always been about the money. It is not about humanity. That is a load of you know what. And they're paying $300.
Another point I want to bring to mind on this. We've been talking about the doctrine of states' rights. We have the power to say no to the federal government when they want to come into Georgia and tell us to implement a program that we have to use our tax dollars to pay. Now, we can't stop them from operating the federal government program in Georgia, but we can refuse to let them use our resources to pay for it. It's called the doctrine of someone help me. Anyone here can remember?
Carolyn, it's even more simple than that. It's
But
more simple than
we
that.
don't have to do this. The federal government will never pay for the
If you refuse the federal money, a lot of these problems go away. That's one reason I want Paul Maynard elected, because Paul has stood up and put on his push cards, no more refugees. That means Paul is ready to say, I don't want any federal money for this program. If you take away money over here, it's some other program, fine, we'll pay for it ourselves. Stop letting the federal government bribe their way in here. All this stuff you see down to General Assembly, I hadn't seen one bill, not one bill, since I've been in Georgia since 1990. I have not seen one bill that materially affected my life in Georgia, except the budget. Look, our budget is $23.8 billion now. It dropped down to $18 billion during the recession. We had an opportunity to cut out this stuff. They didn't. The Republicans have spent us silly. But what they're not telling you is the total budget, when you add the federal money in it, is $40 billion. You never read about that. It's $40 billion. You think we can't do without some of that money? That's the problem. It's not just states' rights. It's state hogging the money. It's the money. It's always been the money. And until you stand up and pull your head out of the sand and realize it's not all these other issues, it's the damn money and nothing else.
Any other questions?
If you got a few bucks, give Maynard some money. He's campaigning against this stuff. He's one of the few people I've ever seen that would stand up to the federal government and stop this refugee stuff. He's a good Christian man. He left Islam several years ago and he's been okay.
All right. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.